Thanks for listening to the Nice Podcast. I am available to deliver keynote presentations and workshops for your company or for your conference. Reach out to me, davedelaney.speaks.com, or email me and we can talk. Now on with the show. As a business-to-business marketer, your needs are unique. B2B buying cycles are long, and your customers face incredibly complex decisions. Isn't it time you had a marketing platform built specifically for you? LinkedIn ads empower marketers with solutions for you and your customers. LinkedIn ads allow you to build the right relationships, drive results, and reach your customers in a respectful environment. On LinkedIn, you'll have direct access to and build relationships with decision makers. Of the 875 million users on the network, 180 million are senior level executives. 10 million are C-level executives. You'll also be able to drive results with targeting and measurement tools built specifically for B2B, and they work. Audiences exposed to brand messages on LinkedIn are 6 times more likely to convert. LinkedIn is the social network that drives the most visits to my website. From all the different articles and interactions that I do on LinkedIn, I have to tell you, LinkedIn is awesome. Make B2B marketing everything it can be and get $100 credit on your next campaign. Go to linkedin.com/MPN to claim your credit. That's linkedin.com/NPN. Terms and conditions apply.
One of the things I learned is that we all are playing tennis with a better player, right? I mean, no matter what level they achieved, in their own mind, their friends were doing better.
Right.
And so I think we all live with this certain amount of assuming that we're not as big as someone else.
Nice.
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 Nice. Nice.
Nice.
Nice.
Nice with Dave Delaney.
Welcome to Nice, a podcast about communication, collaboration, and becoming better leaders. My guest today is Jeffrey Shaw, keynote and virtual speaker, small business coach, and the author of The Self-Employed Life, which I just finished and loved. Welcome to the show, Jeffrey.
Hey, thank you. I'm glad to be here. And thanks for the feedback on the book. It's good to hear.
Yeah. I really did enjoy it. Is Jeff acceptable or Jeffrey?
Jeff is absolutely fine.
Okay, cool. I couldn't remember if every once in a while somebody's like, no, I want to be Michael.
No, I just, when my first book came out 3 years ago, I had to make a decision. From that point on as an author, are you Jeff Shaw, Jeffrey Shaw? I've always just found Jeff Shaw just kind of blends together. It's hard to enunciate clearly. So I went with Jeffrey, but anything out of professionally, everybody calls me Jeff, but I answer to both. I don't care.
I had an incident years ago when I lived in Ireland of leaving a voice message for Heather, my wife and girlfriend at the time. She had gone home to the States for the summer and I was still in Ireland, and I missed her deeply and had a couple of pints in me. And I left a message on her. She was with her parents, and I left a message on their machine saying, "Hey, it's Steve. In Ireland, I love your daughter," and realized I did say Dave, but it totally came out as Steve. And they're like, somebody called in from Galway, Ireland named Steve who said they loved, and she's like, that's probably Dave.
That's awesome.
So yes. Yeah. But I struggle with that too, with whether I'm going to be David Delaney or Dave Delaney, but I've always been Dave Delaney. I'm only David if I'm in trouble with my mom. But apart from that, so anyway, all right. Well, to get into the podcast, I always like to begin with a simple question, I think, but the answers are always interesting. So I'll start with this. What is the nicest thing someone has done for you recently?
Gosh, that's actually easy because just a couple days ago, and it involves somebody that we might know or have in common, and it's Mike Michalowicz.
Yeah.
Do you know? Yeah, Mike. He's an awesome guy. So, Mike is one of those people that I admire tremendously, and really aspire to be like Mike. I also say I think he's the best website on the internet because it's actually fun. Like going to his website, going to an amusement park.
What's his website address again?
It's MikeMichalowicz.com.
Okay, got it.
His last name is not the easiest one to spell, but he's so well known that I think if you get MICH out, the computer will fill in the rest. He's that good.
Or just Google profit first.
Exactly, profit first. But he, just so to have somebody you really admire, he just out of the blue. Now, granted, he did endorse the new book, and I consider us friends. But out of the blue the other day, he just sent me a text saying, hey, brother, thinking of you, wishing you all the success with this book. You're going to kill it or something like that. And it was one of those times when somebody sends you a message. First of all, taken back by, Mike McCallowitz taking the time to text me, but also exactly when I needed to hear it, right? It was that week in the middle of launching a book. The book comes out May 4th. So it was like that moment, that in that day, when I'm like, oh my gosh, like, is any of this worth it? Like, it's that moment, right? Where it's like, what am I working so hard for? And then you get the message from somebody you admire and you're like, there you go. So that to me is the advantage of being nice, because you just don't know exactly when someone's going to need to receive it. And Mike nailed it.
That's great. Yeah, it really is important of taking a moment. I think I hope we all go through this where we think, man, I should really send somebody a text or a, instant message or a call or whatever. And then we're like, and then we get distracted by the rest of the day and we forget about it. Yeah. And I think in those moments, a mutual friend, Michael Port, did the same for me a while back, where he just gave me a call out of the blue and I was like, whoa, Michael, oh my gosh. And, yeah, and I needed it at that time. So I think if for our listeners listening, our nice makers, take a moment and actually and do it.
I made it a rule for myself during COVID. Honestly, that was part of my survival techniques during COVID, because I went into this situation feeling like, as I said to other people, I felt like I had a reservoir of strength available to me, because I went into it I was just beginning to write the book. And this is like my third rodeo. I've been in business long enough to have been through 9/11, living in Manhattan at the time. Yeah. And then, the Great Recession, which affected my photography clients tremendously. And so this was literally my third rodeo. I'm like, okay, I get this. We're going to be in this for, I thought 7 to 8 months. I didn't quite think a year, but I figured this was going to be a long haul. But I went into it in a really good headspace. So I made it a rule to myself that anytime somebody popped into my mind, that I would just shoot them a text. And I abided by that, because I figured it might be that at that moment I had more strength than somebody else did. And maybe they needed that person to show up. And it really was, it kept me going through the whole pandemic, because of how many times I would send somebody a message and they would say back, that was exactly what they needed to hear.
Yeah.
So I don't know. Like I said, I made it a rule going to the pandemic, but I hope it's something I can stick with. If somebody pops into my mind, I just shoot them off a message.
I love that. What happens if you don't have their phone number?
Facebook Messenger.
Yes, of course.
It's one of the two. One of the two is you can almost cover everybody between one of those two, right? But for the most part, the people that pop in your mind, you have some relationship with them to begin with.
Yeah.
And in one instance, I had somebody popped into my mind, and her mom had just gotten some really bad health news. And it was just, and she's not somebody that should be on my mind a lot, but I was walking my dog and somehow she popped into my head. And I'm like, I've just learned to respond to that moment just in case it means something.
Absolutely. Have you ever dealt with, I'm speaking from experience here, of course, but of facing maybe self-doubt where you maybe more of an imposter syndrome kind of thing, where it's like, oh, so-and-so's not going to want to hear from me. Oh my gosh. Do you ever get stuck in that thought or anything like
all
that?
The time.
Okay. Interesting.
Don't we
so
all?
It's not just me.
No, I just assume that we all, it's interesting, Dave. The 36 years I have photographed, very affluent, successful people, CEOs. One of the things I learned is that we all are playing tennis with a better player, right? No matter what level they achieved, in their own mind, their friends were doing better.
Right.
And so I think we all live with this certain amount of assuming that we're not as big as someone else. And, at the same time, we get feedback. One of my favorite stories is one day I was out walking my 2 dogs at the time, and I got a absolutely glowing Facebook message from this woman going on and on about how wonderful I am. And, I'm reading it. I'm thinking, this is really nice to receive. And I'm trying to, just to take it in. And I thanked her for it. I wrote her back and I thanked her. And it was a Facebook message. I thanked her and I said, and at this moment, I'm picking up dog poop. Right? Because, first I wanted to be humorous, but I also just wanted to bring it down to earth. Like, because at the end of the day, no matter who we admire, there's a chance they're picking up dog poop of some kind somewhere. But I I often assume I'm not important enough to reach out to somebody else. I'm almost in that headspace almost all the time. But it's in part because of who we hang out with. When you hang out with people that you assume are playing a bigger game, that you can't help but think, oh, well, I will be bothering them if I reach out to them. And Mike, in a way, Mike is one of those guys to me. So for him to, to reach out was a big deal.
It's interesting too, I guess, because, when a lot of and we share similar, friends especially from the speaking sort of circuit. You're the people that you are communicating with most and who we consider our friends are also like marketing experts who make themselves not out to be better than they are or anything like that. But what I mean is they seem so big right. that they could be out picking up their poop right now. And
yeah, exactly. So it's, they're, but that's part of the, I like to look at it as recognition as a strategy, not a destination, because what we learn is that gaining recognition does open doors, right? It is required as a speaker, author, like we have to gain a certain amount of recognition in order to get other opportunities. It's just not a destination. Like my goal in life is not to be a recognizable name or, that anybody's going to recognize me. Although I will tell you, 3 times I have been recognized by my voice as a podcaster in the world. And that's the weirdest thing ever. Like I was in an ice cream shop in Cape Cod in Massachusetts, and I placed an order for ice cream, and the woman turns around and says, "Are you the host?"
No way.
And I'm like, I don't think my voice is that distinctive, but apparently she's listened enough that she picked up on it.
That's amazing. Yeah, it's interesting too when you go to like podcasting conferences. Like when my wife and I had a parenting podcast we did in 2005, so 2005 to 2008, and we went to like podcast meetups and like a podcast conference that we used to go to back then. And it was so strange. What's like when you'd meet somebody and they'd hear your voice and they'd be like, Dave, 2 boobs and a baby, which was the name of the podcast.
That's awesome.
And they'd say like, hey, how's that diaper rash coming along for Sam? And I'd be like, wait, how do you know about my, it would be so weird.
Yeah, I continually get shocked by what people know about me, but it's because I've opened my own mouth. Like I tend to wear my heart on my sleeve. So I'm okay with it in the moment until somebody recites back to me what they know about me. I'm thinking, gosh, I'm not sure that you should.
If they're keeping notes, it's like, uh-oh. Right. So your book that led this, or it's coming out May 4th, and you kindly sent me in advance. Thank you for that. The self-employed life. I've been pretty self-employed for the last 10 years. And so I'm a little later in the game in a weird way. At least that's how it is in my head sometimes. But, and tell me a little bit. So you've alluded to photography, but of course you do a lot more than that. And that's not even how you got your humble beginnings, because your humble beginnings were selling eggs.
Yeah.
Which I was shocked to hear or to read. I was like, I just, New York Jeffrey or Miami Jeff, but like I didn't picture you out knocking on doors selling chicken eggs. Tell us a little bit about that.
Oh gosh, yeah, I come from really humble beginnings. I grew up in what was then a very small country town about 2 hours north of New York City. And back then, we moved to this town in 1967. And we shared a phone number with 5 other families. We had, the proverbial party line because there just weren't enough phone lines, and it was that remote. My father had previously been in the construction business. We lived in an apartment at my grandmother's house originally, until the age of 3 years old, when my father left the family construction business, which I think, looking back, probably caused a huge brouhaha in his family because nobody left the construction business. But, he knew that he couldn't support what was now 3 kids. I was the youngest of 3. So he took a job with what was a startup computer company that bought up a huge amount of farmland in the middle of nowhere to build a production plant, because obviously the land was cheap, and that startup company was IBM. My father was one of the first 90 employees at IBM's production plant in 1967. And it was an odd upbringing because everybody there was a transplant. I mean, you were either a farmer who probably maybe lost your farm, or sold your farm to IBM, or you were from somewhere else. And we were from, Down County. We were Westchester County, where my grandparents lived. And there were a lot of people from New York City. So I truly grew up in the country, and I saw an opportunity to make some money at 14 years old. And that opportunity was, I thought it'd be kind of cool to sell eggs door to door, right? It seemed like something people would need. And whether I realized it or not, I don't know how keen I was at the time at 14 years old, but part of the impact of that was because most people were from Down County or New York City. So farm fresh eggs was really cool. So I put together this business model. I actually approached, now mind you, I'm 14 years old. This is the way my brain. So I approached a local farmer, and I didn't have access to the cardboard cartons, but he got the cardboard cartons for me. And my mom would drive me on Thursdays to go, and she patiently wait. Actually, I think most of the time she probably dropped me off and then went grocery shopping. And I would sit there and fill up these cardboard cartons with eggs. And then on Saturdays, I would two things. I would pack up. My mom owned a beauty parlor. Straight out of Steel Magnolias, the movie, like as old-fashioned type of beauty parlor. So I'd fill up boxes of dozens of eggs for her to bring to her shop, and they would all sell. And then I would borrow my mother's Oldsmobile Cutlass Supreme, massive big car that I couldn't even reach. I could barely reach the gas pedals at 14 years old. And I would drive around my neighborhood and then surrounding neighborhoods, and I'd knock on doors and sell eggs door to door. And of course, I eventually developed a loyal clientele that would expect eggs every Saturday. But I was always pursuing new business as well and tackling new neighborhoods.
I love that.
And that was my start. I have to say, I probably did that for a couple of years. I think I did it up until I got my license, which was 16. But then shortly after I had my license, when it actually would have been legal to drive around. But at that point, I also had my freedom. So suddenly I looked for bigger pastures and selling eggs wasn't going to do it. So, but yeah, those are my beginnings. And, wasn't too long after that, I went off to photography school and started my photography business at 20 years old.
Did you need like yellow pages to drive it was the green machine, right? Was that what it was called?
Green Monster.
The Green Monster, yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Which at some point my brother shot out the back window with a BB gun. So, I mean, it was, so the rear window is duct taped, and to hold the shatterproof glass, it doesn't fall in, but if you duct tape it, it just kind of like shakes every bump you hit.
Right.
So yeah, there you go. And these took about humble beginnings. But no, I don't think I needed the yellow pages, but I really truly could barely see over the steering wheel. It was just a big car.
That's amazing. That's such an amazing story. And you mentioned, and it remind me here, I believe you said that you're more introverted and kind of shy, right? Or at least as a kid. So how did you muster up the courage to do this? Yeah. To sell eggs, or door to door? I mean, you're cold calling door to door.
Yeah.
Where, I mean, as a cute kid, I'm sure you were able to pull it off where, as an adult, you'd have the door slammed in your face probably. But how did you muster up the courage to do that? Hey, you're listening to the Nice Podcast with Dave Delaney. That's me. Visit Futureforth.com to learn how we can transform the communication at your organization. And if you need a speaker for your next online event or your in-person conference, are we doing in-person conferences yet? Soon, I hope. You can visit DaveDelaneySpeaks.com and you'll learn more about working with me there. All right, let's get back to the show.
I tell you, I almost don't know because to say I was shy is an understatement. Like I had paralyzing shyness. I really, my goal in life was to hide in the corner of my own home. Like I didn't want to go outside, very intimidated by neighborhood kids, but really into personal development and self-help. And so I would take money from making these eggs or whatever little allowance I got from my parents, and I would buy like self-help books by Wayne Dwyer, and I would read these things at home and hide them from my family because thinking that way would just have been weird. I had 2 older brothers and a father. Like, it was such a male-driven household that, I was a freak. So I used to hide it. And at one point, this is ridiculous, but I remember so clear. At one point, I bought a book on self-hypnosis to try to hypnotize myself out of shyness. And in hindsight, it was basically a book about body language. It was basically, this, kind of create confidence by body language. And
right.
So the first time I tried I tried pulling off, I mustered up the strength, and I hung out with some neighborhood kids and tried standing in this cool power pose, and the looks I got were just, I've since looked back and compared it to a cross between Superman and RuPaul. Because I just, by the looks I got, and one kid says to me, "What the hell's wrong with you?" And that was the end of my self-hypnosis. And so, I've asked myself that question many times, but I think we ask ourselves that question or something like that all the time when we're self-employed, which is why. Like, why do we put ourselves through what we do? Because this is not the easy road. And why was I willing to go, as you asked, door to door? And I've come to the conclusion that there's got to be something bigger than our fear. And I don't know that I could identify it at the time, but I knew I kind of became addicted to business by selling these eggs, which became bigger than my fear, because the fear was there. I was, I wanted to vomit sometimes, but the fear was there. But what became bigger than the fear for me was, one, I was so innately proud of myself for stretching as far as I was. Nobody else was saying so. Nobody else in my family, my father, brothers, nobody else was acknowledging my growth, but I was. And that was a big deal to me. Like, I was genuinely proud of myself, and particularly in an environment where nobody else was ever going to express that they were proud of you. So I was being proud of myself. And I also got absolutely hooked on what made business work. I was fascinated by the I've got something to sell and people will buy it concept. And I really, to this day, I feel like I learned everything I've known in business. I learned from selling eggs, because I learned about, how to make something marketable. They could have, and I was selling these eggs for $1.25 a dozen. And I since have Googled that in 1978, the average price for a dozen eggs was 78 cents. Ironically, so it was also 1978. But it stood out as 70, and I was selling them for $1.25 because I wanted simple math. I bought the eggs for 25 cents a dozen from the farmer, and I sold them for $1.25. So I made a dollar a dozen, which is easy. And, but it was figuring out, how do you sell something beyond its market price? Like, what makes it such that people would pay more for it? And it was part service. It was door to door, but that wasn't the biggest thing. The biggest thing was the authenticity piece. What I realized is that the biggest selling point was the fact that they were farm fresh. Like, I was selling farm fresh, grass-fed eggs before they were a thing.
Yeah, right.
And because everybody there was a transplant, many people from the city, that had huge sex appeal. Like, they were genuinely farm fresh. And I tell the story in the book how I used to leave some chicken poop on the eggs to really to really accentuate the authenticity of them. And they actually had a lot of chicken poop on them. But I would clean a lot of it off, but I always left a little bit. Yeah. Right? Dave, I have to say, I really almost feel like I got addicted to the puzzle of business. I was fascinated by the sales process, the marketing process, why people bought, what was the psychology behind it, how you made something appealing. And that has stayed with me ever since. I have never had a traditional job. I've never received a paycheck. I've been self-employed from that moment on. And I think largely driven by just insane curiosity about what makes people tick.
Yeah. And you mentioned in your book, you said, and I have a quote that I wrote, "You can charge whatever you want for anything, regardless of what you charge. It's up to you it's up to you to point out where the value is greater than the cost to your customer."
Right.
Which is exactly that. So how do you, maybe fast forward to now, or your photography business even, but how do you set prices? Like, how does somebody set prices when they don't know what their industry prices are or what their competitors are charging?
Well, that's just it. None of that matters. Pricing is completely arbitrary unless you're selling something that's commoditized, right? Or unless, if you're trying to win on price, then you need to care what other people are charging. But then again, I even question if you price trying to win on price, it's quite possible that you're not making any money, right? Because you haven't done the work to find out whether it's even a profitable price. So to me, pricing is completely arbitrary. Pricing is all psychology to me, because pricing creates perception and it positions your business. Okay, pricing creates perception and positioning. So, and what I mean by that is think about the perception you get. Pricing constantly creates a perception. What's the perception you get of a restaurant that doesn't have prices on the menu? Your perception is that it's really expensive.
Yeah.
Right. What's your perception of Walmart style pricing? That it's affordable. Right. How many times have there have always been times we've chosen to not buy something because it was priced so inexpensively we perceived it as being poor quality.
Yes.
Or the opposite is true. How often we are led to believe something is going to be of exceptional quality because it was expensive, and maybe we find out it's not. Or how about the stores that we walk down any mall or Main Street USA, we walk down the stores we decide not to go into because our perception is that we can't afford to be in there. Right? It's all perception. So the key is you first have to decide what's the perception you want to create amongst the audience that you're trying to reach, and then position yourself aligned with their perception. It's completely arbitrary. I mean, as a photographer, and it also is it can be your differentiator. I mean, as a photographer, when I first started out as a photographer, I tried in my hometown, which didn't fly because I was completely misaligned with the area. Because I had the perception I wanted to create was I wanted to be a high-end portrait photographer. That was not a perception that worked in my hometown. So after 3 years of struggling, I started over again, and I realized that who I needed to work with were affluent families. Not because I thought that they had tons of money to give me, because honestly, for where I came from, I didn't even know what a lot of money was. But what I realized is that people with discretionary income buy luxury items, which is what photography is. And they also have a mindset about handing photographs down from generation to generation. So when I pursued that audience, I looked at the perception I wanted to create and realized I didn't want to be really perceived like a photographer. I wanted to be perceived as an artist. So I compared myself to painters. They were hiring, from what I could tell, doing a little research, that they were hiring portrait painters and paying like $20,000 to have a portrait of their children painted. And I'm like, I can replicate that look in a really good quality way for half that price through a photograph. So I became the photographer that at 23 years old, I set out to have an average sale as a photographer of $8,000 to $10,000. When your average photographer, there were 3 other photographers in the town. I'll bet that they were probably lucky if they made $500 a shoot. And here I am. So it's a perception, but how do you create that, right? So I want people to pay $8,000 for a series of photographs, not one single photograph, but a series of them. How do you create that perception? You had to be priced high enough that people have a perception that it's high quality, that it's exclusive. I had to match their perception of how they see themselves in the world. They are, as a clientele, see themselves in the world as only worthy of the best and willing to pay for it. So that's across the board, no matter how high end, low end. If your clients, if the people you want to reach see themselves as needing to be budget conscious, then you want to price yourself in a way more like a Walmart style that creates the perception that they're not paying 1/100th of a cent more than they have to because they're budget conscious.
That's interesting. So I often hear advice from, different business coaches, or I've read it before about, okay, whatever you're charging, double it. Well, what are your thoughts on that?
I mean, that's just too general for my taste. I like to have information, right? But I think, like I said,
but
it's
you do
positioning.
See that.
Yeah,
right.
I get, but it's absolute position. I mean, there's probably some truth to it because most of us undercharge our value. Being in a creative business, and when I started out as a coach 12 years or so ago, I did start out by coaching a lot of creatives. And the reason creatives, but I think that relates to most people as to why they undercharge, is because what they're really good at is so easy for them, they don't charge a lot of money for it. Right? It's like one of my clients is a really highly specialized computer programmer. And he could fix problems in companies in like 30 minutes, but it would save the company $5 million in production time. And he's charging like $125 an hour. I'm like, you're insane. It doesn't matter. It only took you an hour. It saved them $5 million. Right. So, but it was so easy for him. Like he could see what other people couldn't see, and he would get things fixed really easily. So I think one of the challenges people face in trying to figure out pricing is whatever comes so easy to them, they tend to not see the value in. So that is why I think a lot of coaches say, whatever you're charging, double it. But to me, it's all about positioning. It's about knowing what audience. I mean, for a lot of my work today, a lot of my coaching work, I probably could double it. I probably could charge a lot more than what I charge. But the fact of the matter is of who I want to work with and how I'm positioned. I want to work with self-employed small business owners. So I'm not charging corporate rates. Could I? Yes. Could I build a whole practice serving corporations? Absolutely. I've dabbled in it. It's not my favorite work. I like working with self-employed businesses that are the decision makers because we can get things done. We don't have to go through committees. Mm-hmm. Right. So my pricing is palatable for a self-employed business owner as a coach. It's palatable. Do I think it's super easy? No, but it's palatable and I can get them there. And that's because that's where I want to be positioned. I want to be, not only do I want to be positioned for the audience I want to reach, I want to be positioned for the audience that I want to reach to do the work that I love to do. So at the end of the day, it's selfish.
In the best possible way.
In the best possible way.
Yeah. So your book revolves around your self-employment ecosystem, which is a big part of the Self-Employed Life, the book, which I encourage folks to pre-order, to read and discover more about that. But can you elaborate a little bit about that self-employment ecosystem?
Yeah. Oh my gosh. I feel like this is the answer I always wish somebody gave me 30 years ago, because there's so many misnomers about being self-employed. You know, and when I had the concept for this book, and of course I did my due diligence. And one of the first things I did is I went to Amazon. I wanted to see what books are out there for self-employed people, and was actually shocked that every book out there, if you search self-employed in Amazon, there aren't many books that come up, but those that do are all about taxes. I'm like, this is not what's forefront of my mind as a self-employed business owner. What's on my mind as a self-employed business owner is how I'm getting through the day, or how I'm going to turn the business around during tough times, like the big issues. And so two things really stood out to me. One is that there are no books available. And the second thing that stood out to me is, why is it after 36 years, I'm for the first time even Googling this? Mm-hmm. Right. And I realized that's fundamentally, we self-employed people are so used to doing things on our own, we tend to not even reach out for help. You know, we're so used to just grit and grind and going at it that we don't. I couldn't believe that I actually never even checked before.
Yeah.
So this book to me is it's the solution to the answer to for every single self-employed person I've ever asked why they became self-employed has the exact same answer, or some variation of it, which is, I went into business for myself because I wanted to control my destiny or my future or the hours I work. To which I say, how is that going for you? And everybody laughs. Like that idea that I'm going to become self-employed to control my destiny, what you realize when you become a business owner is that the world is uncontrollable. The circumstances of being in business in the world are uncontrollable. Mm-hmm. Like, as if we didn't know economies can turn and we knew markets can shift and trends can change. Now we know there could be a global pandemic. Right? I mean, who knew a year and a half ago that was even a possibility of shutting down our businesses? So there are so many uncontrollable circumstances. But when I really look deeper at that, then at the question, like, well, then how can I help people? I realized that what I have done throughout my 36 years in business, which I fully and wholeheartedly believe in, is that we can't control the circumstances. Going into business to control our future is a myth. We can't control the circumstances, but we can control the environment we create for the results we want. Mm-hmm. If you set up everything you want, if you set up the environment for the results you want, and you do it with clarity and commitment and true being in the game, first of all, I think you're probably 95% on your way to success. And if it isn't successful, I think it's easier to shift because you can look at what's not working. And that's why I created the self-employed ecosystem as almost a framework. So, and then I'd ask myself, well, what are the pieces? And it really comes down to three big buckets. They are personal development, business strategies, and daily habits. And to be successful being self-employed, all three of those elements of your environment have to exist in good health. Just like an ecosystem in nature, if any one element is off, it can kill the entire ecosystem. And every self-employed person that I've met, and I actually have now created an assessment so people can discover this on their own, everyone's going to be weak or non-existent in one of those three. And I can point out one by one why not one of those three elements, personal development, business strategy, and daily habits, can be missing. Now, innately, everybody's pretty strong in the business strategies. They're putting in a lot of action and a lot of effort. One has to question whether is it the right sized effort, right? Is it the right effort for the right results? That has to be looked at. The ones that tend to be missing or weak, one is personal development, right? We're in such a hurry to get the work done that we may not be putting the effort into developing ourselves as much as we need to. And here's why that's important. Personal development, and by personal development, I mean looking at your limiting mindsets, determining how you can think bigger, really embracing what you deserve, not just what your brain thinks you should have, but what you deserve, how you think bigger, how you get outside of your expectations. The reason that is critical is because it increases capacity. And when you're self-employed, your level of success is directly proportionate to your level of personal development. So you have to, in order to actually grow your business, you have to increase the capacity within yourself in order for your effort to fit in. Otherwise, you're putting in a lot of effort and action into a container that hasn't expanded, a mindset that hasn't expanded to actually believe you deserve more business. Okay? So that's a very often personal development is a missing component. So we have a lot of effort going in, and that's why people end up feeling like they're all over the place, or they feel like they're a hamster on a wheel, because they're grinding out a lot of effort, but they haven't created the capacity for it to go anywhere. So they're stuck by the same limited thinking. And on the other end is the daily habits, which I think are so, you need to have consistent daily habits that keep you moving forward and keep you from being derailed in the uncertainties of being in business for yourself. What's interesting about these three components is that they're not in equal amounts and they're not in balance. A balanced ecosystem does not mean equal parts. Just like if you look at your body as an ecosystem, what are we, 60% water or something like that? Water, blood, organs, they're not in equal proportions, but they're all a necessary integration. Right? Same thing in a business. You're not going to spend as much time in your daily habits. What I teach in the book, you could actually do in 15 minutes, right? But it's the consistency of it. 15 minutes every day of working on having a habit of working on your mindset. 15 minutes every day of journaling can go a long ways to balance the 8 hours a day of hard work that you're putting in. So they're not equal. But not one of those three elements could be missing. And the result is that you have a healthy and thriving self-employed ecosystem. And that's when things really start moving forward.
How do we know when they're balanced correctly? Because I'm sure the balance or that, ratio, or call it what you like, but kind of is different for different people, perhaps. Like, how do you find that sweet spot? I mean, maybe once the clients are ringing your bell, and I don't know what ringing your bell means, calling you.
That's an old hotel metaphor, I think.
Yeah.
Flow, right? I mean, we know the feeling of when things are just clicking, when we feel like we're in flow. The problem is that when things are clicking and we're all like in flow and things are going great, we tend to like push aside the personal development, the habits, and then we wonder why we looped right back around to where we started again.
Yeah.
Right. That's what happens every time. It's when we get cranking, or, I'm too busy to do those things now. And I don't think in this book, I don't equate it to it, but I think in one of my keynotes, I I equate it to if you have a virus and you go and get some antibiotics, the doctor will literally tell you, you have to finish the bottle even if you start feeling better. Okay?
Yeah.
Because if you don't, you can have a relapse. Like there's a point where when you take an antibiotic, there's a point where you feel like you've recovered. Mm-hmm. But there's still more pills in the bottle. And a lot of people are like, oh, I'm better. So you just throw away the bottle. But the doctor or the pharmacist will tell you, no, you have to finish the prescription all the way through. Otherwise, you have a higher risk of a relapse. And that is exactly what happens when people get into flow and they get cranking. And next thing you know, they've let go of their personal development or daily habits. When I hired my very first business coach in 1999, long before it was fashionable, my first phone call with my first business coach, and these were peak years in my photography business. I had an 8-week waiting list, but I had a coach because I just wasn't as happy as one would expect to be when you think your dreams have been fulfilled. I found it kind of empty and lonely, honestly. I felt like I wanted a partner in the business without sharing the profits.
Yeah.
So I found out about this thing called a business coach, and I found one and I hired him. And my first phone call with him, I was explaining to him that, okay, where I'm at in the business, I was all business. I didn't think I was hiring. I didn't know this coaching thing, so I didn't think it was going to have anything to do with personal development. I just thought it was going to be all business advice. So I was explaining to him that in my photography business, one year we would have a really high average sale, but the volume would be down. And the next year, the volume would be up, but the average sale would be down. And I remember literally saying to him, I said, well, if you can help me get those two things right, that's the next level of the business. Like, how do I go from $1 million to $2 million business? And he said, well, you do know it's you that's causing it, right? I'm like, me? Like, how is it me? Like, it's always the economy or some other thing, right? Like, how is it me?
Yeah.
And he said, and he nailed it. He said, well, I can guarantee you that the year that your average sale is down, the next year you're putting all your effort into increasing the average sale and you're not paying attention to the volume. And the next year the volume is down, so you're putting all your attention on the volume and not the average sale. And he was 100% correct. And when my business really took off, I mean, it was already doing well. But when I say took off, here's the difference. Yes, sales went up, but the biggest difference was I put in half the amount of effort to get the same results. And it was because I finally got it right. I understood that often when we hit success, we take our eyes off something else. And then we end up being stuck in this cycle. And that is very true of the self-employed ecosystem. Like if we do the work to create a thriving ecosystem, the biggest danger is that when it's going really well, we're going to take our eye off something. Or we're going to stop putting our effort into something. And then we're going to end up where we started. And we're going to wonder why being in business for ourselves feels like a never-ending loop.
That's interesting. Yeah. Yeah. So you made a point there. You said your business was going very well. I just want to elaborate a little bit more because, this, and of course, this is, a big part of what you do as a business coach. You said your business was going well, but you still sought out a coach, for advice, or you mentioned you were lonely, you didn't have a partner in the business, but at the same time you didn't want to share your profits with which makes sense. So why a business coach?
Yeah, you can kind of I guess the answer to that is sort of in my egg story too, but I think this is true in all our stories, which is that even when things are going well for us, the most successful minded people also believe that they could be doing better. It's
Sure.
it's rarely especially the level-headed, the person who recognition is not a destination, right? That person is likely to always be holding both truths, which is I'm happy with my life and I believe I could be happier. I'm happy with this level of my success, and I believe I'm capable of more. Right. Those are my ideal coaching clients as well. I mean, and that took me a long time to learn as a coach, because in the beginning, it was easy to want to help the people that needed the most help. The problem is that they have a long ways to go from where they are to achieving true success for them, which turns out to not be your ideal client as a coach, because if they don't get big measurable results, they're less likely to tell other people. You don't have an evident portfolio of your successes to share with others.
Right.
So the ideal coaching client are people that are already reasonably happy with where they're at. They just know they could do better. One of the telltale signs for me is that when I have a ideal client is they will typically say something like, they'll express that things are okay. I mean, they could be happier, but they'll almost always say, I feel like I'm all over the place. Almost always. And why that's important to me and why that's such an indicator to me is because the truth of the matter is they actually have a lot of good stuff going on. Everything just needs to be tweaked, right? Their brand message is just off. Like they know who they are. They've even gotten to the point where they're there, but I need to work with them to pull out more of who they are, what makes them marketable, and then translate it into a really good marketing message, because you can know who you are, but the point of marketing is, do the people you want to reach know who you are and what you do and how you can help them?
Yes.
So a lot of it is just tweaking. A lot of it's rearranging to the point that, literally sometimes I'll work with the client, and when we're working on their branding and their website, I can literally take bits and pieces all over their website and rearrange it. Now, granted, usually the work I'm doing is more dramatic than that, but the information is there. And in fact, usually the most important things are tucked the furthest away, which does not work today, because today in business, we need to get people's attention in seconds, milliseconds. We don't have time for them to get your best, juiciest stuff on an interior page. They're either going to get it when they land on that website, they're at least going to get it to the degree that they're compelled by your brand message, that they're willing to even scroll with their finger. Right? But you certainly do not have the time to be mediocre in the beginning and wow them on an interior page. You won't get that chance.
Yeah. And that moves that, or to your point, or from the book, you talked about like replacing, the word marketing and thinking of it more of it as enrolling, right? So like enrolling people from looking at your websites and getting them to sign on or to fill out the contact form or whatever that call to action is.
Yeah. And that's like in the book, I introduced this whole concept of hug marketing, which is my reframe of a marketing funnel. Because everything you do as a business owner, particularly when you're self-employed, again, because there's a deeper relationship when you're self-employed with the people you're serving. And because it's a relationship-based business versus a transactional one, people that are deciding to do business, and I think this is broader in the world at large today, and I feel valid in saying this because I've been in business for 36 years, and probably the biggest shift is that people make a decision on who they want to do business with based on how they feel about that business more than I've ever seen before. Like there's an energetic decision. Like I don't feel good about that. I don't feel aligned with that company's values, that brand's values. Like a lot of the reason why we choose to support or not do business with a brand today is because of how we feel about that brand. Energy, the energy that you create, the energetic response that you want, that can be created in an instant. Like what somebody feels when they see your marketing, look at it this way. What causes someone to open up an email? If you're doing email marketing, the subject line, that's it.
Right.
If that subject line is your biggest barrier, if that subject line doesn't make somebody feel like they want to open it, they don't open it. Okay. So that's just where we're at with marketing today. And I actually quite like it. Do I think it's more challenging in business? Absolutely. I like a challenge. Anybody that's self-employed like a challenge. Otherwise we wouldn't have bothered.
That's true.
Right. But what I like about it is I like living in a world of people that are making decisions based on how they feel about a business and a brand, more so than just I should, because they're the brand to buy into, or, there's some kind of a status. I like the fact that I think it's just better values in a world when people are making a decision based on how they feel about a company. And what that gives us as businesses, both a high bar to meet and the right to do, is to be very clear on what's the energy we want to create by what we're putting out that captivates and compels the audience we want to reach.
And I think I'm sure you make a great business coach, because from what we've talked about and from your book, I feel that you do thrive in that maybe fearful moment, but I think you've really got to push the envelope a little bit. And I think you personify that in this, right back to like, shy Jeff knocking on doors selling eggs, much again, like that would seem horrific to a lot of people and sounded possibly like it was kind of horrific to you if you'd stopped long enough and thought about it. But it seemed to me like you're more interested in just testing and seeing what would work and doing it, and then thriving on the energy from that positive outcome as opposed to just being, stuck in a fearful box and not doing anything.
Yeah. I just, at the end of the day, Dave, I think I am just driven by emotions. Like I said, that's why I was an outcast in my family, if you will, because I was brought up in a very male environment who didn't think, act, or behave like me. Right. Or I should say they all behaved and acted like one another. I was the kid that, as a little kid, probably I think my 8th birthday, I was given a motorcycle because my older brothers drove. I didn't want a motorcycle. Like, take me to an art museum. Right. Like, it just, and I've tried to forgive because it was the time of the age and it's the way it was. But, when you're the youngest of 3 boys and your older brothers are exactly like your dad. Yeah. And the 3 of them are, all in cahoots and behave. And my behavior, thought processes, everything was so different. They were non-communicative. I liked nothing more than sitting down with my mom and her girlfriends and having discussions. Right. When my father would just give up and he and my brothers would go off fishing, I'd go antiquing with my mother and her friends. Right. Because, so I've always liked the emotional side of life. Mm-hmm. So for me, I've always been driven by the emotions of business. That's why I was selling those eggs. Like, what intrigued me was really getting into the emotions of why people chose to pay more for these eggs, the emotion of there being chicken poop on the eggs. Right. What I feel has happened literally over the past 36 years I've been in business this is what excites me so much, is that I think we're finally living in a world that's closer to the way I think. I think we are a more emotionally driven world, and I think most self-employed people are emotionally driven. I think we're seeing a lot of movements in society where people are getting those members of our society that actually have more emotions and are more driven by instinct. Like, this is the world I've been dreaming of. Because, as a speaker, we have a lot of very intellectual friends that are speakers. And I would sit there and listen to them recite their facts and research. And I'm like, you can give me research all day, but I'll tell you what, my gut tells me it's going to be different. My gut tells me that research says one thing, but I think there might be a different response. And I will always trust my gut before I trust research. I pay attention to research. I pay attention to science. It's a part of the equation. But at the end of the day, I will allow my emotions and gut instinct to challenge, if not overcome, because in my mind, if you put gut instinct up against the brain, I think the gut will always be a smarter choice. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So I want to be respectful of your time, and I know we only have a few minutes left, and I do want to get to the lightning round of questions. So I'm going to get to those in one sec, but I did want to point one thing out that really stuck out to me. I do have other things I want to talk about, but I really encourage people to buy the book. Things like the wisdom folder, which I thought was brilliant, and about your thoughts on niches or niches or wherever you're from, depending. I'm Canadian and I live in the States, so I get confused. I'm so many ways. And I get confused. I'm not sure if it's a niche or ditch. Niche. I like to call it niche because I like to say niche the ditch. Right. Excuse me, ditch the niche. So I prefer to say niche, but it could be niche. I don't know. Yeah. I've been in the States long enough. Like, I've been here 14 years. So I've been here long enough to start to forget like I'll say process to an American and process to Canadian, and I'm totally backwards. Right. And then I'll say sorry. Cause because you do. That's what we do. But the other thing that I wanted to mention was your What's Going Right journal. And this is something I just celebrated a birthday and thought, you know what? And I've been dabbling with journaling again. I did journal a lot
when I was much younger. And so this is something I've been doing much more of lately, but I've been falling into some of my negative journaling habits when I was much younger, where I was miserable and I would write just negative things in my journal, which is good to do. It's better to get it out, right? But at the same time, it doesn't put you in the most positive place. And so what I started doing, which is something I stole from what you talked about in the book, or borrowed, I guess, is what's going right. And so I've actually started, like my own little 365. So I'll turn 50 next year, on my next birthday. So every day this year leading up to my 50th, I will start every journal entry with what's going right. And in the few days of my 49th year, this has been going great. I've been really enjoying journaling again and just starting each day on a positive note. But where did you get this idea from? And talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, this has been the biggest game changer for me. And again, always, being a self-employed person my whole life, I think, I'm always looking for ways. If I'm going to teach it, I try to explain and put it in real life perspective. And I think the fact matter is, when you're self-employed, I think for all of us, we never have enough time. And I think it's even worse when we're self-employed, because we're wearing so many hats. There's just never enough time. Mm-hmm. So I like results. I like to figure out. I even tell my gym trainer, like, give me the least amount I can do for the biggest result. Like, that's just the way I look at things. Like, I have the least amount of time, but I hate wasting time. And I had a hard time with gratitude journals, to be honest with you. And I feel bad, because I think gratitude is a great characteristic and it's something we should have in our lives. It just didn't do anything for me. And I found I never, ever stuck with a gratitude journal, because if I woke up in the morning, I've geared my life to making sure I live grateful for what I have every moment of my life. So if I wake up and the sun is shining and I'm breathing and my dog is next to me, I'm good. I'm grateful, right? Yeah. But it just didn't have tangible results. So I started this idea of a what's going right journal actually at one of my lowest points in life, which is good because it's also exactly when you need it the most. I think it's a practice. It's one of the daily habits that I offer in the book. And it's one that is particularly important in the hardest of times. And I started it right after I had moved to Miami. I moved here in a relationship. The relationship broke up shortly thereafter. I did decide to stay in Miami, but now I'm living somewhere I don't know anybody. I was definitely pulling back the lever on my photography business to the extent, and it slowed down much quicker than I anticipated. So now it was financially complicated because of the building up of a new business as a coach was not going as fast as the decline of a photography business when I had kind of decided to leave, kind of start getting out of the business. Right. So full of challenges. And as we know, when life is full of challenges, it's hard to see what's going right.
I thought when life is full of challenges, you sell eggs.
Oh, yeah. Well, similarly, I use eggs to make waffles, and that's a whole other topic. That is, waffles are my answer to everything.
I'm coming to Miami for those waffles.
Waffle Sundays, one Sunday a month. Right? Yes. So, but there's a lot of eggs in waffles too. So what I was looking for was something that gave a more tangible result. And I do, I said a moment ago, like, I will always lead with emotions, but I pay attention to science and research. And there are ways you can retrain the brain. And the What's Going Right journal is just that. So what it is, it's a daily practice. Now, for me, it's the only thing I journal. Now, I fully support journaling just to let things out. But my What's Going Right journal is about a 10-minute practice where every sentence, what's going right is, and I will list a dozen or two things of paying attention to what's going right. Because here's what we do know about brain psychology, is that what we focus on, we get more of, right? You can't unsee it. And that's true of, it's a very similar psychology to if you've never heard about a movie or a book and somebody tells you about it, suddenly you see it everywhere. Okay, it's the same brain priming that's going on, right? So once your brain is primed to see something, you can't unsee it. And so the more you acknowledge what's going right, and the list kind of picks up speed. Like some days, believe me, I'll start off kind of slow. Like, okay, what's going right here? Okay, let me keep thinking. All right, I got it. It's going to come any minute now. What's going right? Right. And then something comes and then you're like, oh yeah, well that too. Oh yeah. And then this person introduced me to this person. Oh, and then all of a sudden, like something big, like, last week I was invited to be a contributor to Entrepreneur magazine. I'm Like,
Yeah,
and I'm like,
congrats.
right. But I mean, that's like 12th on my list. I'm like, oh yeah, and then that. It should have been, it could have been one of the top ones, right? But a lot of times what happens is our biggest accomplishments at any given day aren't necessarily what stand out to us the most. It's the little things. It's the Mike McAllowitz sending me a text, which did make it into my What's Going Right journal the next day.
Yeah.
So what I love about the practice of What's Going Right journal is that it feels good in the moment, but I truly believe it brings about tangible results, because when you start training yourself to see what's going right, what are you going to see? More of what's going right. And that starts overpowering how our brains are wired to only see what's going wrong. We're wired for survival. We're always going to remember the one criticism over the 9 compliments, right? Because we're wired that way. But this is a way of starting to see more of what's right than what's wrong. And you'll start seeing more of what's right. Next thing you know, you're a happy camper living in nirvana, because what you're seeing is what's going right. And like I said, to me, it just brings very tangible results where I start getting more good business coming in when I'm in a good frame of mind of what's going right.
Well, I'm gonna continue doing it, and hopefully you will see my name as a speaker in more events, because that's what I'm working on now. So we'll see.
Yeah, I'm gonna count on it.
All right. So lightning round. Let's do this, and then we'll wrap things up for the day. So complete this sentence. Nice guys and gals finish
first.
What's a nice book you recommend for fellow nice makers?
Sell the Way. I always have to be careful I get this right. Sell the Way You Buy by David Priemer.
Oh yeah, I made a note of that actually. I need to
so
check
good.
that out. How is Jeff Shaw nice to himself?
I kayak a lot. And that is just such a treat for me to be out on the ocean, kayak like that. That's a treat. My partner and I, we pack up some wine, and it probably is it's just the nicest thing I do for myself.
Not as much kayaking in Manhattan.
No, non-existent. That's become a very much a Miami thing.
Yeah, you traded in, or you bought the Mini Cooper? Is that right?
Yeah, I had a Lexus SUV when I drove down here from New York City and traded in for a mini convertible. But in New York City, I would bike. Like I had a bicycle, but
yeah.
I traded that in for kayaking down here in Miami.
Yeah, when I was, because I'm from downtown Toronto, and so I would ride my bike everywhere. I was always for like accidental exercise, where you're just riding everywhere, you're not even thinking about it. And moving to Nashville, where you need to drive everywhere has been, it's been challenging that way. Okay. And then what, if you had a billboard, what would it say?
Oh my gosh. If I had a billboard, what would it say? I'm going to say that it would say something I hope serves everybody else even more than myself, because I don't feel like I need to advertise myself. But it would say something I need to say to myself often, which is, when the world looks like it's falling apart, trust it's coming together for something bigger than you can imagine.
Ooh, I like that. I like that a lot.
Yeah.
Excellent. Well, Jeffrey, to everybody else, it's Jeffrey. To me, it's Jeff. All right.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. And I do want to encourage everybody to pick up or pre-order The Self-Employed Life, because trust me, it is a great book, and there's so much good stuff in there. So, and I do want to thank you for being on the show.
Thank you for having me. It was very nice of you to have me.
Thanks for listening to the Nice Podcast. Theme music provided by Alistair Crystal at alistaircrystal.ca. Hey, if you enjoyed the conversation, please take a moment to leave us a review. The links are in the description. I'll have more of that soon. Did you know that new subscribers of the Nice Maker email newsletter receive a free copy of my little ebook, Improve with Improv? Each Friday, I share nice stories, tools, tips, and much more, and you can grab it now from nicemaker.co or by clicking the link in the episode description. I'm Dave Delaney. Take care and be nice.
You may know you're listening to this show along the Marketing Podcast Network, but did you know there are other great shows on MPN to help your business? Colin Jeffries and Eric Reed host a great podcast called the Rethink Marketing Podcast. Colin, tell us what these fine folks will get out of listening.
Well, Jason, on the Rethink Marketing Podcast, we unpack the myths, misconceptions, and flat-out lies of marketing and sales. Our listeners tell us that we help bring different perspectives to common business growth, wisdom, and advice.
That's great. Where can people subscribe?
They can subscribe at rethinkmarketingpodcast.com or listen on their favorite podcast platform, including marketingpodcasts.net.
You heard him. Go subscribe.